Hello and welcome to episode 25 of Taking Liberties for this year. It's almost wrapping up towards the end of the year, isn't it? I think we're more than 3/4 of the way through for our season this year.
Yep.
So today we've got just Lee and myself, I guess.
Hello, dear listener and viewer.
And viewer, I suppose. We have basically the coalition's usual array of
Communist.
Yeah, I guess you could say communist policies. To be perfectly honest, this is one straight out of the Greens playbook. They want to cap the executive pay of bankers.
Yeah.
I'm sitting there going like, wow, that is a...
Get it right. Greedy fat cat bankers. It's the only way to talk about them, yeah.
Greedy fat cat bankers. I totally forgot.
Yeah.
I mean, how dare I?
Yeah.
And I'm drawing a complete blank to what the second one was.
We're going to talk about North Korea.
That
place. Speaking of communists.
Yeah, so we're talking about people who are communists and...
also, North Korea. Yeah.
So, with no further ado, I suppose we should start with what's actually going on here. So, Scott Morrison last week penciled a potential policy where they wanted to, on top of the banking levy that they've introduced, they want to control the salaries of executives on banks in banks, which, quite frankly, to me, I would expect this to come from Labour left and maybe the Greens. Actually, it's actually a Greens policy. I know that for a fact.
Yep.
But it's a very far left sort of thing, and it's weird for the I guess you could say Conservative Party to bring up as a potential policy.
Theoretically weird, not actually weird, but in terms of the reputation, you'd think it'd be weird, but I think the reality is that no, actually, this is exactly... Well, I mean, we've already seen this year with the budget that their big tax was, on bank assets, because, that's really the best way to go about fixing the budget, just taxing the banks more.
I think we had, like, this huge thingo with, if I recall correctly, Sinclair Davidson, where we were talking about, the tax... about the ludicrousness of the bank tax,
which I don't think has actually gone anywhere. Like, I don't think it's been implemented. I don't think it's even been voted on.
I thought it was voted on because it came in with the. I was pretty sure it came in with the budget, which passed.
Oh, did it? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Maybe I was expecting separate legislation.
Well, I can't think of any other reason why after the last interest rate cut, all the all the retail interest rates seem to stay the same. It's only the small lenders that have decreased their interest rates.
Okay.
So I would expect that behaviour if they were paying an additional amount on their bank levy.
Well, let's have a quick look.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, keep talking.
Yeah, sure. We'll let Lee fact check me here. But the point is basically Morrison has come out with this as a potential policy. Now, my question is... I mean, in Australia, it's a given that they can control salaries, at least on the lower end of town. We kind of lost that entire debate with, like, the minimum wage and the award wages and the entire existence of Fair Work Australia. So there are conditions and salaries that are controlled at a minimum level under what we call the award scheme. Now, it's never really been expanded to talk about whether the upper end of town or even the middle end of town is going to have pricing controls attached to it. And it's actually interesting because the only place I know that has this kind... I mean, loads of countries have price regulations at the lower end of town. The entire concept of a minimum wage is pretty ingrained in any social democracy, with the exception of the Scandinavian countries and Germany. But it's... Like I said, it's unusual to see this level of pricing control outside the Soviet Union, at the upper end of town and possibly at the middle end of town.
Yeah, I mean,
and I say quite clearly outside the Soviet Union.
Sure.
Because to my knowledge, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, the Soviet Union is the only country that ever instituted a maximum salary.
Yeah, I mean, there's been definitely, I mean, like, just general CEO pay, there's always been schemes to try and, by particularly by sort of lefty groups and unions, to try and peg it to a certain sort of like to the workers' pay, or so it's not just banks that this has been pushed before. I mean, I wouldn't be. I guess. I mean, the thing about Australia is like the market's small enough that I guess you're not going to have CEOs worth $2 billion breathing down your neck if you start proposing this kind of stuff. So like you think about the EU or the US, like the kind of money that the upper end really earns is like obscene, and if you go to war with those people, it's like
wars against actual like people who could have their own country.
Yeah, they're basically where I guess in Australia, like the top CEOs probably make maybe 20 million or 30 million or something. So I mean, I guess that's probably enough to fund a political campaign. But yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't think it's that unusual in terms of the proposal. I mean, the thing is, it hasn't happened yet. So what Scott Morrison is proposing is a change to what the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, basically the regulatory agency for banks, changing what they could regulate. So
one of the things is that
it has to go through Parliament as well. So like,
it has to go through Parliament. But one of the things that he wants APRA to look at is the pay of executives when it comes to their health of a bank, and the speech that he made when he was suggesting it, to me it makes no sense, because he was basically sort of saying like, oh look, we guarantee the loans and all of this stuff to the banks, so we have like Parliament needs, well, not Parliament, but like we as the public, greater public, need to have some scrutiny as to how much these bankers get paid, because we are guaranteeing their loans. And I sat there going like, wasn't this the entire point of your bank levy, is that you're taxing them for that component? And I'm sitting there going like, and even then, that's not. So the loan market isn't the securitized. That's not what the government-backed loans securitized. The government-backed loans securitize a portion of the savings pool, right? So there's APRA makes sure that their two money pools are separate and never the twain shall meet. Like that's the entire point of that regulatory agency. So I guess I don't know. It's like trying to unwrap Morrison's speech where he was talking about this. It basically made it sound like, hey, the government is giving money to the banks, therefore we should control the executive salaries like a public service. At least that's what it looked like he was trying to get at. And of course that's nonsensical, because the banks aren't public service institutions, right?
And what's weird is in the week that we've had this call for regulating the CEO's pay and whatnot, the Treasurer acknowledges the real problem. So this is what he said at a Bloomberg business event. He said, complexity and inertia in highly regulated markets is business's profit's best friend and often the consumer's worst nightmare. He described the banking sector as a quadropoly with profits driven by a unique and privileged regulatory system. But Mr. Morrison said banks have been built on regulation, frankly. And over time, large businesses who live and depend on the regulatory environment can get very good at seeing those regulations work to their advantage, and the balance between those businesses and customers can get out of whack. Now, there is little he could have said more that is like, no shit, Sherlock. Like, that is absolutely the problem with the banks, and yet he thinks the solution is to regulate the banks more. Yeah. I mean, that's the absurd thing. I mean, this is like how stupid the coalition is on this entire thing. Is like, he just acknowledged the problem, which is the banks are too big.
Yeah.
They're immune to consumer pressure, and yet the solution he proposes is not then to like heavily deregulate the banking industry.
So I think a couple of years ago when we started this podcast, I said that this is there's a concept called homeopathic legislation, which is where you keep adding more and more watered down legislation, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. And this is an example of that. I mean, banking regulation is the poster child for homeopathic legislation. And, I mean, recently they passed, what was it, the thing that restricts your credit card fees, your credit card surcharges to whatever the thing pays. Now, here's the thing, right? Like, it's advertised that it's 1.5%, right? Like, that's the most. That's all they should ever charge you. Now, here's the thing: I know for a fact that MasterCard and Visa have recently dropped their credit card merchant fees, right? But I will freaking bet you that everyone who's a member of, if you see someone with a Westpac or an ANZ one, I know for a fact the savings will have been passed on to them immediately right now, and I will bet you your bottom dollar that merchant will charge you 1.5%.
Yeah.
Right? And until it's and they're not going to go after every little mom and pop shop that does this.
Yep.
Right? So here's the thing: in 2003, it was illegal, right, by a contract. Sorry, not illegal by a contract, but basically it was a contractual term. If you had one of those card payment systems, right, the card owner, right, the one who was allowing you access to their credit network, basically said you cannot charge a surcharge, right? And the expectation there is, well, it's a cost to your business. It's a cost like any other cost.
Yep.
Right? You can either have access to our credit system or you can't. Right? Now, the government got their sticky fingers involved here because the Business Council obviously took this up as an issue with the Liberal Party at the time. And they basically said, no, it's fine for the surcharge to be passed to the customer because they're the ultimate end customer. Now, if you take a look at it right now, you've got CabCharge, which charges 10% bloody surcharge.
Yeah.
Right? And it's connected to the same card link system that's owned by MasterCard and Visa. MasterCard and Visa, varying on which bank you're with, and I said Westpac and ANZ have recently dropped it to, if I recall correctly, 0.74%. But I'll bet you you're still getting charged 1.5.
Yep.
Right? What do you call it? Amex, to match, has dropped theirs recently, either from 3.41 or 2.7, which varying on which one you're at, to by 1%. So it'll either be 1.7% or 2.4%. But yeah. I'll bet you're being charged either 3.5% still or 2.5%.
Yep.
So can the ACCC go after each one of these cases? Probably not.
Yep.
So this piece of legislation is fucking worthless.
Yep.
And we're getting ripped off effectively because the government got their nippy little hands into it. The reality is, right, in the US, right, there are card companies that literally pay stores to accept their cards.
Right, okay.
And I'm talking about like your Discover card.
Yep.
In Australia, because of our banking regulations, that is illegal. It's called predatory incentivizing or something like that.
I mean, I saw this great cartoon, it's a comic, and it's a woman is in prison and says to one of them, what are you in here for? Oh, I charge my customers too much. Asked another person, what are you in for? Oh, I charge my customers too little. Charge them too much. It was price gouging. Charged them too much little. It was predator pricing. I charged them the right amount, and it was called collusion. So you can't win with these regulatory regimes. It's just insane. And ultimately, that what you're saying about by contract, the card companies refuse to let them let businesses pass on the charge. I mean, that's market regulation. So what we'd probably be in favour of is with a market
self-regulating.
Exactly, yeah. So
completely self-regulating.
Yeah. So that's the kind of thing that if you actually let the market. The market set expectations based on what consumers want, then it's going to work out better for consumers. When you start having government putting their fingers on the scales trying to figure out, what do we want consumers? What's the right thing for consumers? Well, they're not going to know because they're not in the business of finding out what consumers want. They're in the business of politics, and politics doesn't operate according to those.
Correct. And it's not just that. So all across Asia, there's this brilliant system called Union Pay, right, which is actually really, really good. For the particularly the what do you call them? Particularly for the store owners.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Yep.
So the way Union Pay works, so credit cards typically have MasterCard and Visa have a 55-day period before you actually get paid that money.
Yeah. Okay.
So someone might have bought something from you, but it's 55-day churn before it's completely in your account and it's yours to hold.
Because of the chargebacks and stuff.
Potential chargebacks and stuff like that. So. There's delays and stuff like that. Union Pay, which is all across Asia, gets rid of a lot of that hassle, and basically it treats it like a forward loan. Right. It gives you the forward loan of the money, and then after 55 days. And not just that, but their transaction fees are lower. Now, because of the actual regulation cost of meeting Australia, we don't have that great service.
Yep.
right? We also don't. You might notice we don't have a lot of cashback schemes as well.
Okay.
And typically in Australia, you'll have either cashback or points, never the twain.
Right.
Well, as in if you go to America, particularly, and particularly South America, right, you get both.
Yep. Okay.
Right? And the reason why you get both is because it's Visa and MasterCard, because they've realized they're making a fucking mint, right, from these transaction costs. So part of it is giving it back to the end customer because they're like, okay, look, we've taken a lot off you.
Yep.
We're going to give some of it back. So it's quite frankly, the entire point that credit cards are a product. It's a financial product, right? And I've realized we've drifted from like Morrison's little banking thing to like explaining like how little financial products are being fucked around by regulation.
Yep.
Right. And much to the detriment of the customer, we pay some of the highest credit card fees in the world.
Yep.
Right. We pay some of the highest banking fees in the world, and like Morrison said, right, like it's to the benefits of the banks.
Yes.
We're not really getting anything extra for this.
Yep.
Right. Like, our banks are no more safer than the United States.
No. Well, and just to go to that whole issue, to go to the, from the one of the smallest details to the biggest details, the 4 pillars policy. So essentially the federal government stops any sort of takeover by overseas banks of the big 4. And that's going to hurt consumers because we're dependent on foreign sources of income, foreign sources of credit and banking. Like all the money has to come from somewhere. Australians don't save enough to sort of internally generate enough savings to fund all this stuff. So we need to essentially borrow money from overseas. Well, the best way to facilitate that kind of thing would be to let the big 4 banks at least enable somebody to buy them if they wanted to. If they could get access to, bigger banks could take them over, then they'd have better sources of funding for their credit products, all the mortgages, all the rest of it. So it's just another aspect of how the consumer gets screwed because politicians don't like competition. So yeah, let's talk about
really
other communists.
Dreary and boring topic. Let's talk about other communists. Yeah. So the North Koreans have launched another missile again.
Yep. Oh, and apparently tested a nuke underground. There was an earthquake reading this morning, I think. So
I'll be perfectly honest. I'm okay with North Korea blowing the shit out of its own territories. My objection is typically if they start blowing up other people's territories.
Yeah.
I cannot emphasize I cannot emphasize this enough. I'm totally fine with Kim Jong-un blowing the shit out of North Korea.
Yeah. Well, that's I mean, so I should say on the outset that if I've done a video, like after I came back from Montpellier meeting where they had in South Korea, where they had discussions about this sort of thing, I asked a former commander of US forces in South Korea about this kind of stuff because he was very, very hawkish, very, very sort of thinking that North Korea is belligerent. So that there was this whole thing of
belligerent.
Well, but here's the dilemma that I didn't understand and he couldn't explain to me because he just couldn't seem to have a coherent answer. So there's 2 things that he was holding in tension. That is, firstly, North Korea wants to go to war. They want to reunite the peninsula. They want to start a war with everybody. On the other hand, he's saying they'll never win. So just unless you if you just assume that the Kim regime and the military leaders and all that they're they're sane, they're not completely out of their minds, which there's no evidence to say they're not. Well, you'd say they're never going to invade. They're never going to win. There is no point North Korea could ever win a war, even with nukes, even with the biggest land army in the world. You could drop a nuke on Seoul or Tokyo, and they'd still lose because nukes are. When they're dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II, where they're just paper cities, it does a lot of damage. But when you're talking about dropping them on concrete buildings designed to weather earthquakes, you're not talking about North Korea flattening cities. And even with all the artillery in the world, it'd take months and months and months to obliterate Seoul, and they wouldn't even last that long. As soon as North Korea actually leads an attack, the US kicks into high gear. It's basically over in a week. Not even that, probably, because the North Koreans use World War II era tanks or Korean War era tanks and Korean War era planes. They don't have anything better than stuff from the 70s. And, I mean, heck, South Korea alone has, like, Abrams tanks and modern military fighters, and their economy, the combined economy of Japan and South Korea is like 450 times bigger than the North Koreans, and their combined populations are like 9 times bigger. Like, there's no situation where, even if the Chinese got involved, there's no way the North could win. They would lose, and then they'd be obliterated. And why would they want that? There's no reason to think they'd want that. So there's no reason to think they'll go to war, short of the US sort of preemptively attacking them. Like, if they think the US is going to attack them, then of course they're going to attack. But I just don't.
Wife's calling you.
Yeah, someone's calling me. It's Trump asking me for my thoughts. No. So, you know, like, it's just, there's no, like, anybody who says that we should fear the North, I just say, prove it. Give me reason why. There's no reason to think the North is ever going to attack. They do terrible things to their own population. Absolutely agree. That's awful. That's not a reason to go start firing on the Korean Peninsula. And certainly it doesn't seem like China, North Korea, South Korea, or Japan want a war. The only people who seem to want a war is the US.
Well, I was going to say that. So, like, North Korea's intentions are very, very easy for me to understand. Right? Pretend you've got, like, this dude constantly, like, you know, a little bit of a way, just constantly saying, like, I'm going to beat the shit out of you.
Yeah.
Right? And then you've got, like, your neighbors who are, like, pretty much his friends, right? And your friend is just off to the side going, like, you know, not really helping you, I guess.
Yeah.
But, like, you know, there's a... If I was in the position of North Korea, I'd probably develop nuclear weapons as well.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yeah,
and you'd never give him up either. Like, you look what they did to Gaddafi. He gave up his nukes, and look what happened to him.
Well, he gave up his chemical weapons.
Oh, his chemical weapons,
yeah. But effectively, yes. Once you give up your chemical weapons, you're fucked.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, it's like that. Out of everyone's intentions on the planet, North Korea. So America is very easy for me to follow, right? They mean pretty much whatever they're going to say. Right, whatever they say is like...
Maybe, yeah.
they're, like, anyone who reckons there's, like, all sorts of corporate interests and stuff like that, that kind of comes afterwards. It's not their initial reaction. Their initial reaction is, we got to do something. We've seen a problem, and we got to do something.
Yeah.
Right? That something is always drop World War II bombs on them, but, yeah, I mean...
Yeah.
So, but North Korea's intention... For, like, you know, it's one of the least unadulterated, very obvious as to what they're doing. And quite frankly, if you think about any situation where, like, you know, you've got enemies to all sides, you're gonna, when you're backed in a corner, you're gonna try and get the biggest sort of weapon you can to defend yourself.
Absolutely.
And despite the fact that I don't like the North Korean government or their system of government, I find their approach to be entirely rational.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, like, it's pretty easy to understand the motives of everybody involved. Except the US, because they are who they are. But, like, it's the Chinese don't want a unified Korean peninsula with US troops on their border, you know, and a US backed regime in Seoul. So that's, you know, that's pretty obvious. If I was China, I wouldn't want that outcome either.
Yeah, hang on. What's so hard to understand about the US's intentions?
Well, firstly, because Donald Trump doesn't have a consistent, coherent thought in his mind.
It's not Donald Trump. It's existed for a long time. Donald Trump's just the latest dude on the chain. I mean, if you think about it, the US's intentions is also pretty obvious, right? It's unfinished business.
Right? Well, so if you just think, okay, they need to support their allies. If you think, okay, the job of the US is to ensure that South Korea and Japan are supported in the case of war, then you think, why would they attack? They would never attack, because the South Koreans don't want war and the Japanese don't want war. Why would they want to fight? Because they're both in the firing line.
South Korea and Japan are almost ancillary to this. It's unfinished business, dude. Right? Like, America goes out to win wars.
Yeah, but
that's what it does.
That's not their stated reasoning, though. If you were to go talk to H.R. McMaster or whoever's in charge of this shit show, he would not say, oh, we've got unfinished business, we're going to go to war. He would say, we need to defend our allies.
No, that's the justification, right? But if you take a look at it, what is in the mentality of the American, like the average American or any American that like goes, yes, it needs to, like, you know, North Korea is a threat. it's unfinished business because like it's not finished yet, right?
Well,
like they started this in the Korean War,
Yeah.
right? And they got part of the way there, and then they called effectively a truce, right?
Yeah, but I mean, that's not... Like, we can't work on what we think is in their heads of... Like, what maybe possibly might be in the heads of the generals in charge of this thing. Like, all we really have are their stated intentions. And, like, well, firstly we've got their actions, and then we've got their stated motives. So, like, their stated motives are to defend their allies.
Yeah.
Okay, we have no, I mean, that seems pretty, I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Like, I don't think that's, like, you don't need to sort of pass that for anything. I think that's true.
Yeah.
The question is...
But you were asking about the attacking motive, right? Why would the US go on to attack?
Oh, you sure? Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, if they, to go on to attack, well, yeah, I mean, there's a reason, like, that makes sense. It makes sense why they would attack if they thought that the North Koreans would develop a nuclear weapon. And I think that's because they're probably not going to suffer the consequences of whatever happens. Like,
Yep.
I mean, the likelihood of North Korea developing enough missiles to actually meaningfully threaten the US is probably pretty slim. They're a desperately poor regime, even with what they've got. Like, it's not like communist regimes are known for their, like, great technical competence. Like, their way of solving problems is to literally just throw troops at their own citizens until their citizens are dead, and they can suppress them. That's what they do. That's all they can really do. I mean, the Chinese are peacefully living with their neighbors, sort of, and the best they can offer in terms of, like, power projection is they've got, like, an ex-Soviet aircraft carrier they've dragged from Ukraine over to China, and they're, like, refitting it. It's like 50 years old. Like, there's not like communist regimes are known for their, like, massive, extensive firepower, and heck, even the Soviets, like, they had a lot of missiles, but, like, I suspect towards the end of their time, it's probably not, like, the best stuff they have on offer. Like, I suspect the US have still got a much better armament.
Yeah. Well, there was... I remember when the first load of disarmament started with nuclear proliferation, and I only know this because I did nuclear physics at university, and they were looking at, like, the actual... Like, the first loads that were being disarmed from the Soviet Union had completely decayed.
Yeah.
Right? They were uranium-238 now, and they basically went, like, non-fissile.
Yeah.
So, and there were a large portion of the Soviet decommissioned ones that they were getting were, like, pretty much already non-fissile. So the back then there was a little bit of a trust issue that, hey, are you just giving us the non-fissile ones for disarmament and just keeping the good ones on the side or something like that? But on the other side, the United States, when they disarmed, obviously they must have had access to better cyclotrons and everything because they had working...
Sure.
Fissile.
They had a working economy. You can afford that kind of stuff when you actually have, like, people not dying of poverty. So, it's pretty straightforward. Like, the USSR ran out of puff because they ran out of money. But anyway, I mean, that's yeah. So nevertheless, no one but the US wants war. The only people who want war is the US, potentially the US, because they're not the ones who are going to suffer the consequences. If they really were consulting with their allies, they would. I mean, they may not remove troops. Like, so Doug Bandow at the Cato Institute, I think he makes a brilliant case for why they should remove troops from the Korean Peninsula. I think that's spot on. But yeah, I mean, the reason Trump and all these other guys can be belligerent as they are is because they're not the ones who are going to get the crap bombed out of them. They're not the ones who are going to end up having their civilians shelled, or nuked. Because, like, I mean, sure, I wouldn't trust a North Korean nuke to make it to the US, but I imagine they could probably get it across the border. Like, you could build a catapult and fling a warhead and probably hit Seoul. So, big trebuchet. Just go medieval style. So
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, like, I would not want to, like, you're right. There are major issues for the region.
Yep.
But like I said, I have my doubts about North Korea's ability to actually build anything that'll...
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there is an issue with proliferation, so they have tried to sell stuff to the Iranians, and I think it might have been the Syrians as well. Was it Pakistan? I think Pakistan...
Pakistan was the source of their tech. So Pakistan's been a nuclear country for ages.
Sure, but didn't they buy their stuff from North Korea? Or was it the other way around?
Other way around.
Okay.
Yeah, because China learnt nuclear technology as part of, like, the Nixon trading
thing.
Okay. Because the Russians weren't willing to give nuclear technology to China.
Right.
And that started the US-China relationship.
Okay.
And then, in a roundabout way, it basically ended up giving nuclear technology to Pakistan.
Okay. All right.
Because the Russians gave nuclear technology to India.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, nevertheless, like the North Koreans have tried to sell stuff to Iran. That's probably a little bit more dangerous because you've probably got people in there who are probably like, "Hey, Hamas, why don't you have a nuke?" You know, I mean, I don't think it's likely. It's
No.
The probability is probably above zero, probably not much above zero, but you know,
I can believe a dirty bomb, but never a nuke, because the biggest thing, so Jerusalem is the third holiest city for Muslims.
Yeah.
So
But
whoever
Tel Aviv is probably just as good a target.
but it's so small, the radiation could spread.
Yeah.
So so the main issue is like any Muslim that effectively ends up irradiating Jerusalem would become very, very unpopular.
Yeah, true.
In the Islamic world.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I mean, like, and I think mutually assured destruction also rules it out. Like, if a nuke goes off in Tel Aviv or wherever, like, who do you think the Israelis are going to like blame? They're not going to be like, "Oh, Hezbollah, you guys suck." They're just going to start nuking Iran because they know it's going to come from them. It's not going to come. It's not coming from anywhere else.
Yeah,
so,
Saudi Arabia doesn't have the capacity for it. So,
I mean, I guess there's issues of like you could destabilize the region. So then the Saudis want to get nukes to make sure they're not going to get nuked by the Iranians. So I mean, I legitimately think mutually assured destruction is actually a really good policy. Like, it actually really works, and yeah, that's kind of the end of it. So even if the Saudis were to get nukes, unlikely as it is,
that's a good point to end the episode.
Yeah, mutually blow up the world.
All right. All right. So like, comment, and subscribe if you like this podcast.
Tell us if you disagree. This is a good one where people might disagree, so let us know.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we have had commentary. I haven't been answering the comments because they've all been directed at Lee.
Yeah.
But
fight me.
I mean, feel free to leave a comment for me. So,
Recreation nukes for all.
See everyone next week.